Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy.
The Human Invasion, written by Arnett. Humanity was a recent addition to the galactic community. Just under 7 years had passed since the first contact was made between us and the Galactic Council. Our faster-than-light capabilities were inefficient but improving. Our military tactics were standard, though our space combat doctrine was underdeveloped. In almost all ways, us humans were a perfectly average species. And we were quickly and peacefully invited to the Galactic Council as a junior member. Despite all of this, just a few short weeks ago, the human invasion had started. I was standing behind a lowered curtain, dressed to kill. There were 3 of us standing in formation. The air was thick with anxiety, and Yahi was fiddling with the pack at his waist off to my left. Her voice came over the earpiece that I had. "Showtime in less than a minute. Good luck." The voice was compressed to the point that I couldn't tell who it was. From beyond the curtain, I could hear the show's host talking. "You know them, you love them, and for the first time ever, you can see them live. Here for the first Galactic Extranet appearance, performing their #1 hit song, Baby, I Love You. Please give it up for Velvet Sound." The curtain dropped, and the lights turned on above us. The screams of the crowd were deafening, but we were professionals, not even a wince at the noise. Nor did we miss a beat as the music came on. The next 4 minutes were a blur of singing and dancing and cheering fans. At one point, when I wasn't near the front, I noticed a disapproving glares from the parents. Same as it ever was, I suppose. Before I knew it, the song was over and we were taking our bows. The easy part was done. A performance was a performance, even if the crowd was a bunch of aliens. The hard part would be the album signing that we had to do in 25 minutes. While humans were physically average and technologically underdeveloped, there was no species in the galaxy with as rich and diverse a culture. Not that the galaxy took notice at first. Such an unremarkable species was easy to ignore, especially as accessing human media was difficult. That all changed 3 months ago when, after years of hard work translating books and movies, intriguing programs, and securing broadcasting rights across the galactic space, the human internet was finally integrated into the galactic extranet. At first, there was little change. A few aliens checked out what we humans had to offer out of curiosity. But it quickly grew from that. Word spread around the galaxy that the humans were making music unlike anything that they'd heard before. Hypnotic melodies and radically new chord progressions. Stories longer and more complicated than what would be written before. Provocative dances and otherworldly clothing. A revolution was coming to the galactic media, and it was coming fast. I'd like to say it started in earnest when Velvet Sound released our second album. Our debut had been a huge success back on Earth, and soon Yahi, Victor, and I were household names to humans. A pretty simple pop boy band, but one that had avoided the overt sci-fi theming that had taken over the media since first contact. Authentically human, we were called. And to a galaxy beginning to obsess over human music, that was the best thing to be. Our security guard was leading us to the signing location. He was a logodron, meaning that he was tall, hairy, and grey. Large ears, good for listening for threats. Looked a bit like a koala, if a koala was 6'9" and built like a truck. Hard to tell how he was feeling about the position escorting a human boy band. Logodron faces weren't physically expressive like ours. Instead, they communicated through pheromones and subvocalizations lower than natural human hearing range. They still appreciated human music, however. If the Logodron I could see waiting in line were anything to go by. The actual hall that we would be spending the next 2 hours in was, honestly, quite boring. While humans did tend to be quite a bit more architecturally bold than other species, there was really only so many ways that you could make a big empty room and lay out some tables and fences in it. Interior design was frankly the only creative pursuit where human styles weren't more developed or numerous than the alien alternatives. I honestly felt bad for the security here, especially the ones that had come from a species with more sensitive hearing. The moment we took our seats for the event, an ear-piercing scream went out. Even a few years of experience back in human space hadn't prepared us for this. I looked at Victor, and we shared a pained smile and winced. One of the species, frankly, I'm not sure which, had screeched at a pitch so unnaturally high as to literally feel like it was piercing our ears. After that, however, the actual event ran smoothly. After all, we in the band had been coached extensively in the weeks leading up to our trip to Capital Station. Close to 60 species living on the station, though human music was probably only appealed to half of them. Regardless, though, we had to learn proper English translations of 60 languages, where to look and how to respectfully shake the hands or equivalents, signs of happiness, sadness, or offense. It was exhausting, and we had been running on maybe 2 hours of sleep up to the night before our performance. But it paid off. What somehow no one had anticipated was the fact that our fans could and would do the same research on human customs and behavior. This led to a somewhat awkwardness, although nothing that couldn't be laughed off. The occasional handshake or high-five mix-up that occurred when species had different numbers of configurations of limbs. In one case, I went to do the customary bow for the Milau fan. The Milau were the quadrupedal race, reminiscent of sheep. Unlike sheep, however, they had 4 long, dexterous tails that had used to manipulate tools. As I went to bow, however, my head hit something solid. Looking up, the Milau had in their tails a prosthetic human arm that they were holding out to me. The highlight, however, were the fans that attempted to flirt with us. This was nothing particularly new, and we were briefed on some of the courtship displays of the species that we would probably be encountering. And, much like handshakes, some fans learned human courtship displays in turn. What most stood out to me was when the Vrishu fan made her move on Victor. Vrishu were remarkably human in appearance, save for the presence of 2 extra pairs of arms, blue skin, and 6 eyes arranged in a crescent across their forehead. This one particular Vrishu had been getting her album signed by Victor, and was about to move on to get it signed by Yai-He, when she stopped and asked a simple question. "Did it hurt?" Now, this was concerning and confusing. She hadn't seemed to take any action to hurt us, but maybe she had accidentally done something that we hadn't noticed. Did what hurt?" Victor replied, trying to hide his confusion. What followed was the first and only time that I've seen a Vrishu take on a shit-eating grin as she answered. "When you fell from heaven." She proceeded to wink with all 3 of the eyes on her left side at the same time. It took everything in me not to burst out laughing right then and there. Not out of any malicious, but from the sheer absurdity of the life that I had found myself living. Like I said, aside from an awkward cross-species moments, the album signing went off well. Almost all the fans were respectful, and we were, for our part, excited to meet them. Notably less excited and respectful, however, were the protesters waiting outside the event. While most of the galaxy was enthralled by humanity, the explosive success was triggering just as an explosive backlash, and as the vanguard of human cultural moment, we were the target of the vitriol. The objectors to human culture were a varied bunch. Some identified the possibility of long-term human cultural dominance as a threat to their own cultures. Some of the more militant or scholarly species viewed human culture as a corruption. The moralists felt that humanity's romanticization of sex, drugs, and individualism would create a generation of selfish psychopaths. The intellectuals felt the human culture numbed the brain and would create a generation wanting to pursue the useless arts instead of going into the more valuable sciences. Whatever the reasons, however, the small minority of people certainly didn't seem so small when they were united, and a few hundred of them were blocking our way to the car that would take us to the hotel. We kept smiles on our faces as they held signs decrying us as simple apes, and held our heads high as they called us to be thrown into either the army, jail, or the vacuum of space. As soon as the doors to the car were shut, however, I felt a tear trickle down my face. Finally, after a day's worth of stress, of awkward moments, of vicious threats, I allowed myself to relax out of my public persona. I took a shuddering breath and looked up as I felt 2 hands on my shoulders. Victor and Yahi were looking at me with watery smiles, no doubt feeling the same way. We'd made it through the first day of our galactic debut. The opening salvo of the human invasion had been fired, the first of many that would follow in the coming years as the other species started to dig further and further into human culture. For me, Victor, and Yahi, though, there was little time to think of matters like that. By the time we had arrived at the hotel, our manager had called a meeting to start preparing us for an interview the next morning. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my videos. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just want to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 patrons and channel members. Alithia, Barky, Fudic Yol, Cam Maxwell, Caspar Onholtz, White Van 420, Lord Asrakal, Arcadian, and Oakfield.